It's the audio one.
All right, I'll call the meeting to order. This is the Recreation Commission. I am Chairperson Todd Lindmark. The time is 7:03, and this meeting is being video and audio recorded. Agenda items. Going to, first item is the acceptance of the previous meeting minutes. June 1st minutes. If there's any questions or things that need to be corrected, I looked them over. I didn't see anything glaring as far as any corrections that needed to be done. Tom or Eliza?
Nope, I did my best.
Did a good job.
Or Kevin.
Kevin?
Beautiful. You did a great job.
Okay.
Because you took the minutes.
Liza did.
No, you were writing down there.
Liza.
Okay.
I did the minutes.
Okay.
Just so you're aware.
Yeah, well, okay.
No changes to the meeting minutes then?
Well, as far as the...
No.
Go ahead.
No disrespect to the previous secretaries, but the minutes are the best I've seen in a long, long time.
Good thing.
Thank you, Liza.
Kevin, you had a comment?
No, I don't.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the previous meeting minutes of June 1st, 2015.
Second.
Tom seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
I'll abstain because I wasn't at the meeting.
Perfect. Vouchers to be signed. I'm in the process of doing those. This next agenda item. Next agenda item is the CPC representative election. At the last meeting, we had the CPC nominations. I nominated Tom Terpstra. Kevin Doolin nominated himself. We did try to go through the vote process, but I don't think we actually completed the vote properly, reviewing the meeting. So at this time, I'd like to make a nomination and do this properly. I would like to nominate Tom Terpstra for the CPC representative. I make a motion.
I will second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain or nay?
Which is it?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Moving on, Mr. Leahan wanted me to put this on the agenda items, and we can go over this. The board member roles and responsibilities. Did you want to address a couple of
Sure.
questions on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
I thought it would be a good thing because when new members go on boards, sometimes it's good just to talk about roles and responsibilities. If for new members of school committee and for new members of Board of Selectmen, the state actually holds classes to help folks learn the process of where the boundaries are as to how they can and cannot conduct themselves. Unfortunately, they don't do it for all boards, and it's too bad. They should. But the two things that I thought would be important is, one, that no individual board member has the right to become involved or to direct any of the staff independent of the action of the board. You act as a board collectively. Whatever issues anyone has, you bring to the board, you deal with it as a board. You do not deal with it independently. The other thing that sometimes I think is misunderstood is that boards are strategic in nature. They're not operational. Most boards should not be getting involved in the day-to-day activities. That's what the staff is for.
Correct.
And boards collectively should not be involved in doing the day-to-day management of the process. Those are the two common things that tend to happen sometimes in boards. Even after the schools, they still happen.
Okay.
But those are the two things I wanted just to bring up.
Sure.
So,
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. And obviously, my role as chairperson is to kind of direct the meetings, collect items for the agenda items, go through the agenda, and then, pretty much get through the meetings and hear the concerns of the other board members and address them, on an individual basis, and be respectful of each other. Good enough? Okay. Moving on, the agenda item, CPC project updates.
CPC has not met since our last meeting.
Okay.
Everybody's on vacation and going back and forth, so we're hoping to get a quorum together for July.
Okay.
Do you want me to address the town pond quote?
Oh, I forgot about the town pond. Yes, please.
So, just to refresh people's memory, the town pond is a CPC project that Recreation actually went to CPC, I think in 2006, to get it started. And a lot has happened there since we were came up with a plan, came up with an agreement, and we were moving forward. Town pond is a man-made pond, even though it does have its own springs. It does have a feeder pipe that goes into the pond. It was originally built by Ken Wood, the original, I believe the original, I don't want to misspeak, conservation member in town. And it was the area was used for swimming and fishing, and it was a very active location. So, but in the 80s, that stopped, and the town pond really became very overgrown and such. So we wanted to create paths, walking around it, possibly make it a fishing hole. A swimming hole. That was in the original paperwork. Since then, it was decided not to do that. But also, but we also wanted to make it a place that people could fish and have access to, easier access. And we were moving forward on things. And then about a year and a half, we noticed that the pond was a little bit lower than usual, but also flatter, not as much air seemed to be going into the pond. And that is actually physically visible because the feeder pipe that goes into the pond literally was bubbling up, would bubble up, and that stopped. So we tried to have the pipe blown out, and that didn't work. We tried to have it snaked out, and that didn't work. So we asked Bob McGee from DPW to go down and take a look at it, and they did some work, and they found that the pipe was literally disintegrated. It had disintegrated over the years. So I believe, and I'm not going to remember the date, but it was possibly January of this year that the Recreation Commission voted to no longer proceed with Town Pond because of the feedback that we had heard from the CPC and as far as conservation goes about not replacing they didn't want the pipe replaced, or it didn't matter to them one way or the other to replace the pipe. From a conservation point of view, which is fine, but in order to put fishing platforms in, you really need to have a well-aerated lake or pond, so it didn't seem like it would make sense for recreation to proceed. But we went back to conservation and we had some dialogue, and they did say that they are in agreement to have the pipe fixed. Recreation wanted to get a price.
Can I speak for a minute? Because I just...
okay.
Because when things aren't right as far as what things are said, things need to be corrected for the general public.
What's not right?
As far as the feeder pipe, as far as when we voted no, I think it was back in March, February, if we look at the meeting minutes, we voted no, and our director ran into the chairman of the Conservation Commission at like 5 o'clock, and we received a 10 o'clock email at nighttime asking, he said that instead of we filing the notice of intent to work with the town pond, the Conservation Commission would be willing to file the notice of intent. And then when I had gone to a March 4th CPC meeting, I distinctly remember the members talking about that, or perhaps it was in February. My recollection kind of is a distant past, but we didn't, as a board, vote to reconsider, but what I did, because when we had the snowfall, when we were talking about the town pond, once the snow melted, I actually took a field trip in April, and I walked back there, and there are people that live in this town that thought before it was like a swimming hole, and that it could be restored to that, because we've already spent $35,000 or $25,000, and we have $55,000. Yeah, my point is that there's a bat house about 10 feet from that pond.
Yeah.
I don't know who put it up there, but that's just to show you, I took a site walk. We, as a member, when we talked about, when the former chairman, we were going to get together with the Conservation Commission and put our heads together. That never happened, unbeknown to me, okay? As far as what the strategy was, there's a 4x6 sign as far as down in the Recreation Commission of all the engineering and all the landscape architecture of what this would be as far as the town pond.
Okay,
so
but stop for a
I want the
second.
public...
Stop for a second.
Yeah.
You were trying to correct something, but now you're going off on this tangent, so...
It's not
what
a
is it-
tangent. As
what
far
is
as
it
the
that you're
board,
trying to correct?
when the director talks about we as a board, we didn't as a board vote. She received an email from the chairman of the
Yeah.
Conservation Commission. We didn't talk about this as a board, okay?
I believe if you go back to the minutes, if I recall correctly, and I don't have the minutes in front of me, but
Okay.
there was a time that we took the vote to actually cease and desist. Then there was communications afterwards, and the Conservation Commission did want us to move forward with this, and we had a meeting at the Conservation Commission that we went to ask them, what is it that we need to do, whether it was the notice of intent that needed to be filed, who was going to be filing, and things of that sort. And the first order of business was getting this proposal from Bob McGee, because if the expense of fixing this pipe was $100,000, we're not going to do it. But if it's the $5,000 that we're looking at, we're potentially going to be doing that. So I don't know. I know that everything was pushed off because of the snow, and we couldn't get together, et cetera, because of the snow and do the walk around. Thank you for doing the walk around. But I think we're trying to figure out putting this feeder pipe in at the $5,000 expense. Does it make sense? And then what are the next steps? So it's a process. It's a long process.
I do understand that, Chairman.
Okay.
But I just want to be clear, is that when I went, and the minutes may reflect that, I appeared after the field allocation meeting. I was before the Conservation Commission. I talked with the chairman and Dan Crofton, who's the CPC member, after our vote, okay? And you and Ann weren't there. You showed up like 45 minutes or an hour later, and they were asking where your whereabouts were. So I don't know what transpired when you and Ann met with the Conservation, but the chairman, John Weddleton, raised his hand, and I talked about my feelings and what went on as far as when we voted no.
Okay.
So, just so that everybody understands, I was at that meeting
Yeah.
before you and Ann were.
Okay.
Okay? As a member of the Recreation Commission. And I voiced my concerns.
Okay.
Just like you, as not
Understood.
a chairman, but as, okay? Understood.
So I don't know
Okay.
what point you're trying to correct
Nothing.
again. Okay.
Just for the record, it's on.
So, Ann, back to you.
Okay, so I was giving some history, just to reacquaint ourselves. So going back to the February 11th meeting, the Conservation Commission meeting, Todd and I went, and we talked to them, to the Conservation Commission, and asked them about the notice of intent paperwork, and if they would fill that out and complete that portion, if they decided that a new notice of intent was needed. There is a notice of intent in place, but we weren't sure if it encompass the scope of the pipe. So we asked them to look at that, and at that meeting, John Weddleton did say that, and I think he said Marie and Janet at the time, would do that paperwork if it was required. And then also, we said that we would get a,
Go ahead, Ann.
we would get a quote for the pipe repair. So, just between our last meeting and this meeting, I did get a quote, which you all have a copy of, and it is $5,000. Bob McGee gave us that quote for doing the work and then also restoration. And this is the information that the Rec Commission had asked to have to determine if we were going to vote to reinstate activity of the Recreation Commission and the Recreation Department at Town Pond. I also received an email from Janet DeLonga today, the conservation agent, and she did say that a new notice of intent would be needed. So I just emailed her back. I copied yourself, I copied John Weddleton, and just said, just want to, clarify and, that you'll be doing the paperwork. This is, if you want to approve the work, because it's conservation land, so it's up to them if what's being done as far as digging something up and restoring it. It's not our call, it's their call. So they need to be comfortable with it. So I just asked her to go back to the Conservation Commission and find that out and get back to us and confirm that.
Okay. So, go ahead.
Yep, I'm a little bit confused. So, as far as when we voted no, right, as far as moving forward, and I would agree with Tom Tertzfer when we had previous meetings, when he said we have more resources that we need to devote to other things other than Town Pond. Whose jurisdiction, as far as the monies that are sitting in the CPC, right? When we voted no, things kind of stopped, right, until our director received an email from the conservation chairman. Okay. So, moving forward, who is driving this project? Is it recreation or is it conservation?
Would you know?
Well,
I'm not sure.
Recreation initiated the project with Concom, but it was several years ago. And since then, things like the pipe breaking has changed some of the plan for Town Pond. We did go to CPC, the CPC, and asked CPC if fixing the Town Pond, if they felt that it was in the scope of the money allotted for Town Pond based under our request. And they did agree that they did feel that it was, not agree, we were just asking a question. So they did feel that it was, and they felt that, and this is and maybe for some other reasons as well, but because we want to fish there, you have to have an environment that fish will live in.
Right.
So without that feeder pipe, the oxygen level was to a point that was too low that it really wouldn't hold fish. So they felt that it was within the scope. It is conservation land, though, and it is a body of water, so you have to abide by all the rules of conservation. And they have to give approval for the work that's being done there. The notice of intent has to be filed, just like everyone else.
Yep.
So even though we're asking to move forward with the work, it's up to them to say that this work can be done. And that's that's conservation land. So.
Does that clarify it?
Not really. So when we just so I understand, we had to give the approval to move forward with the land, right? As far as the project, recreation? Because when we voted no, right, as Tom and I would agree, right, as far as, and even though money is sitting in CPC, that's in limbo, and maybe can return to the taxpayers or move to some other needy project, there are a few people in town that want to see this Town Pond restored. To be quite honest, only sitting here for less than a year and a half, I actually thought the goal of this board was to restore Town Pond to a fishing hole, to where, but when I took that walk and how long that walk was and all around, that's not even feasible. Now, when we talked about this, before I thought it was going to be a swimming hole, I said, why can't these people that want to fish, right, why can't they go to Comey Pond across from the paint factory, and why can't we build platforms there rather than spending money at a pond that hasn't been in swimming use for over 20, 25 years? We've already spent $35,000 or $25,000 engineering all this. We have a great 4x6 engineering drawing, and now we're looking at putting in fishing platforms and we have MBTA commuter rail people that park there. How are the people that want to visit that site, right? How are they going to get to that site when the town has approved permit parking for Norfolk residents, okay? And I walked that, and that's a good walk. And
There's
someone
closer
with
parking in there if you drive in beyond the commuter rail parking.
I do know that, because I walked that in April by myself. But how you would snake through that with a car, because it's not paved or anything, and then there's a little roundabout, I think this town, and I would agree with Tom when he said, when we voted no previously, I think as a board, and this is just my feeling, and Tom iterated it a few months ago, I don't think this is worthwhile. I think we have other needs as far as recreation uses than putting fishing platforms in a site that, have you walked it?
I have not personally walked it.
I
Have you
walk
walked
it
it?
every day.
Okay. Have you walked it,
Yes,
Jim?
I have.
You have. Have you walked it, Tom? Because I did walk it, and I know that there's a bat house there 10 feet from the water. I don't know who put it there. I have one in my property. But that's why I was kind of curious, because why would we want to, like, recreate, for people that have lived in this town all these years, a swimming hole, when you've got a bat that does, collect insects, but they do carry
Okay.
very
So,
serious harmful effects.
May I please just address
Sure.
that? So the bat house, there are actually two bat houses there, and the one that you're referring to was actually put in a location that was not, it was not supposed to be in that location, but it was done without getting approval ahead of time for that particular location. Both the bat houses were an Eagle Scout project. It was actually one of the reasons we put together a procedure for Eagle Scout projects to be done in town. So it's a bat house that can be moved. But the Town Pond project started by a former recreation commission, and to assess all the ponds. And we had Fish and Game out and to look at all our ponds, to assess all the ponds. Town Pond was, they were actually very impressed because it's a very cold, spring-fed pond. It had quite a bit of oxygen in it, cold enough to hold trout over the winter, even though it's a small pond. So that was really the motivating factor to recreate, or not even recreate, just restore Town Pond to an accessible area. And it was not, initially, when they were first looking into it, they did have swimming on the description, but that soon came off. So that's off the table. It hasn't been on the table for a long time. But the fishing part was, the parking, I think, there is parking down there. That's the same parking that was there when it was a very active location. Part of the plan is to have a couple of places to park even closer for people that have a difficulty getting access. But I was asked to go back and get a quote from Bob McGee, how much is it going to cost to fix the pipe. That's what the commission had asked for in order to help make a decision as whether recreation was going to proceed any further with Town Pond.
Sure.
So that's what this is.
That's where we're at now.
That's where we are.
Tom, you want to say something?
That's correct, Ian. We did give you permission to pursue it a little further. As I recall, we voted not to spend any more money down there. I don't think the vote included looking into other alternatives to fix the pond. We're just looking. There's been no decision to spend more money down there, Kevin. We're just investigating the possibility.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the 55, and I'm just saying the 55,000, I think that's the amount that CPC has
There's roughly 55,000.
earmarked, and that's specifically for town pond, that can't be utilized
Correct.
for other projects unless it was taken back
Correct.
and re-voted on.
Right, town meeting approved that, so.
55,000 can only be spent on upgrading our town pond.
Okay. So knowing that the cost of the repairs to do the town pond, just to get it so that, you know, the pond itself can be operational is $5,000 to add the feeder pipe in, and then we reassess after the feeder pipe further down the line to see, you know, if the feeder pipe's in place, what else, what other things can we do? Whether it's putting up the fence that we need, clearing areas out, making parking more noticeable, what have you. There's still additional monies that are in the account to do that on a going forward basis. Can I finish? So I think we need to, you know, as a board here, since we voted to not move forward with the project for town pond, again, I think we need to look at it and say, do we move forward with the project for town pond? And I think we do it, you know, slowly to see if the feeder pipe works, great, then the next steps. But if the feeder pipe doesn't work after it's fixed, then we need to reassess, I think, at that point and see what our alternatives are or options, if any, to fix the town pond. But again, you know, that's monies that really can't be used for anything else unless it's re-voted on and taken back, and I don't know all that process. Any thoughts, discussions? Yes?
Why don't we take a step back, because a few months ago, the former chairman of the Recreation Commission, we were going to get together as a board and brainstorm with the Conservation Commission as far as what the long-term, the short-term and the long-term project. Let me finish.
I say a word.
I know you didn't, but you were about to. What the long-term goals were, okay? Now, I know we have the money sitting there, but why would we spend $5,000 to fix a feeder pipe when we met as a board, okay? We agreed as a board to meet, whether it was going to be at our meeting or the Conservation Commission meeting. We were going to discuss as a board and get our collective heads together and talk about this as a community that wants to do the right thing for the town. So I don't think myself, you know, I don't know why that never moved forward, but as you, a new chairman, I think we should meet with the Conservation Commission. I don't think we should be looking to fix any feeder pipes, you know, in the pond until we meet with the Conservation Commission, because as a board, we voted no to move forward with this. Now, those monies that are sitting in the CPC, if someone wants to put something forth at town meeting to have those returned to the CPC, all well and good. I'm willing to research that. But as it stands now, we voted, even though the water area is a conservation issue, we as a board voted no to move forward. I don't see anybody on this board, anybody actively seeking out to meet collectively as a board with the Conservation Commission and talk about what we want to do, how we want to spend taxpayers' money for a pond that is so distant from where the commuter people park and all those cars, and the walking path to get to that pond versus Comey Pond that sits right on the edge where the Vazella
Different
property
project.
is.
Correct. And then, like I said, that's a whole different project, so that's nothing we can really even address as a board to even
Right.
talk about Comey Pond and whether we have funds to do that.
Right.
I believe, if I recall the minutes correctly, we did have a vote of cease any further activity going forward with this particular plan. That came to Concom's attention. Then we had the meeting, as you're well aware of, that you attended prior to us. Ann and I went there afterwards and had the discussion to say, you know, we've decided as the Recreation Department, we didn't want to move forward with this because of the burdensome with the cost and all the notice of intents and everything else that we would need to do to move forward. And at that time, again, we didn't have the quote to what it cost to repair the feeder pipe, which is where we're at again. So the cost to fix the feeder pipe is $5,000 to get the pond operational. If that works, great. If it doesn't work, we'd have to figure out the next steps. I'm assuming that it's going to work because it's just a feeder pipe going in and it allows the fresh water to come in and we'd be able to have the fish there. Now, all the other steps of whether we do fishing platforms or fences or clearing and all that, we can have those discussions at a later time, but I think it's probably better now rather than later to discuss whether or not we move forward with this town pond repair now. Have those discussions with Concom maybe at a different time to see what might be better, or CPC with respect to how they perceive that area to be done. But, you know, we're talking about the town pond repair now. Any discussion on whether or not to look at possibly moving forward with the town pond repair so that we can then figure out the next steps? Because like I said, if we don't do anything, we're never going to know the next steps, and then we'll be in limbo.
I think we were advocating, Recreation was always advocating to have the pipe repaired because of the health of the pond, and it would and to bring oxygen back into the pond. Whether we walk away or not, you'd still have a pond that's viable for fishing. I mean, it may not have a platform, it may not be cleared, but you can drop a line in. So I think that was some of the past discussion about, you know, creating a healthy environment for the fish and other life, aquatic life, rather than having the pond just kind of sit dormant and flat and very, you know, have a lot of algae growth and have it be overgrown.
Now, the only other question I have is, we move forward with saying, okay, based on the quote that we have to get the town pond repaired, this notice of intent, you know, what are the costs involved with that? Would we be absorbing that? Is that?
Well, I can tell you the past notice of intent, the first notice of intent was done by LICOT, which is now, I think, Aquatic Controls. I think they've combined. And for them to do the notice of intent, but there was a lot more involved. There were some phragmites and there were some other things involved. It was about $3,500. And then there's a filing fee. I think that we went to Conservation to ask if they could do the notice of intent, because it's really not. It's certainly involved, much more involved than something I can do, because I have no expertise in it. I had nothing. I knew nothing about doing them.
Well, that was one of the factors that also made us not move forward.
Right. So if they did it, there would be some filing fees and such, but that's, you know, fairly minimal. Okay. All the maps have already been done. The state of, you know, so everything's been done. So I don't know if they're going to need money or have any expertise or any testing to get a notice of intent done. When we went to the meeting on February 11th, I think John Weddleton's indicated that that Janet would do the notice of intent paperwork. He didn't mention anything about hiring anyone to do a notice of intent paperwork.
Just for the record, that meeting that former Chairman Ken Lawrence and I, when we met actually in this room, but NCTV wasn't televising because there were other things. They were too busy recording other issues. But, and the meetings won't reflect this, but Ken Lawrence and I, when our director didn't want to file the notice of intent, and she was talking back and forth to the board members, we looked at ourselves, Ken and I, and said, well, Ann, what do you want us to do, right? Because in one respect, she was talking that she wanted to move forward. In another respect, it was too burdensome. Now, this isn't on TV, so as a board, collectively, with Tom Terpster's insight, we voted no to move forward with anything to do with Town Pond. So just for the record,
That's fine.
that's
It-
how
it's
that's
part
how
of the
it
minutes.
went. Well,
It is part of the minutes, yes.
Well, it may not be all in the minutes, because
I'm
you were
saying all the
taking the
pieces.
minutes, so.
So just to clarify, it came up at the January recreation meeting. We had just walked the Vazella land. We were talking about, I think that was when we were talking about Tom Pond. And it was at the walk of Vazella land that one of the conservation members said to us that that the conservation did not, and I don't want to be, again, this is 6 months ago, 5 months ago, conservation didn't have a feeling one way or the other if we fixed the pond, and they were fine with the way it was. And that's what I brought to the recreation meeting. And I did feel that, if the pipe is not going to be fixed and it's not going to be viable for fish, why would recreation move forward? However, I did state at that meeting, when a vote was going to be moved, I think Kevin made the motion to make the vote. I did hesitate because I explained to people that I was a little bit hesitant for a vote to be taken based on something that was set out in a field by one person.
Sure.
That it wasn't any formal notification that we got, and I thought that I just felt it was a little too casual for the vote to be taken, and that's why I had the hesitation, and that's what I pointed out to the Recreation Board at the time.
Sure. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Obviously, I can't speak to what Kevin's talking about because I wasn't party to the meeting, so, but what is the question that's before us right now?
Do we move forward with the town pond repair for $5,000?
And so that is a votable question here on the table this evening. So it may very well, Kevin may be right, it may make sense to meet with Conservation, I think it would. But I think in order to do that, you've got to have some meaningful data to decide whether or not what you will or what you can or cannot do with that pond. And in order to do that, I think you've got to figure out whether or not it's repairable. If you don't know the answer to that, there's really no point in having any dialogue, because how do you decide something that you don't know? You don't know whether it has any opportunity to be viable until you fix it.
We also didn't know the cost
It seems
of
like
it.
Conservation is driving the
wait,
agenda, because
Please,
we voted no as
Please,
a board.
Kevin,
Hold on,
as
I
you
know.
pointed out, I'm not through.
Right, okay.
Thank you. So that, to me, seems to be what we should be debating, is whether or not we want to evaluate whether or not the pond is viable. Do we want to take the opportunity to spend $5,000 to find that out, or we just write it off? Is that not the question that's before us?
That's the question.
So that's what we should debate.
You have an issue?
Yeah, I would just say, because the issue before us as a board, and previously when we met, and this is a new makeup of the board, but when we voted no, and then when our recreation director met with the chairman of the Conservation Commission and asked for us to reconsider our no vote, before we even spend $5,000, I think we should have that meeting with the Conservation Commission. I don't think, we're not writing off any money. That money is sitting in an account that was earmarked by the town meeting members to spend to repair Town Pond. I think in good conscience, if we're going to even move forward with spending $5,000, we should have that meeting with Conservation, because as a board, before you were on the board, we voted no to this project until our recreation director heard from the chairman of the Conservation Commission. So that's my feeling.
May I, Mr. Chairman? I understand that, Kevin. You've made it very clear. I don't question that at all. I would just ask, what are you going to accomplish by meeting with Conservation before you have any evaluation as to whether or not this project has any potential? what are you going to accomplish?
Collectively, as a board, we need to brainstorm, and what are the goals of the board? What is, because we're not even talking about how people are going to access that property.
Totally different issue. If
We
you-
need to brainstorm the whole project, the short-term
Clement,
goals and the
hold on,
long-term
hold on.
goals of that project.
Kevin, you
Okay.
can't brainstorm something unless you know it's viable.
Right.
You're wasting a lot of energy and a lot of planning on something that may never come to fruition because it isn't viable. You need to know if a project has the potential to be viable. Then I completely agree. Do the brainstorming and figure out whether or not there is an opportunity to move forward, or do bigger or less, or whatever you want to
I
do.
mean, I've heard there's asbestos in those pipes. Why did we wait like 4 or 5 years to spend the $5,000?
It's
beyond
water
our
over the
agenda
dam, no
here.
pun intended, Kevin. We are where we are.
Excuse me,
Okay.
I got the quote because I was asked by the Recreation
Sure,
Commission and
absolutely.
Ken Lawrence to get the quote at a meeting so you could decide about the
Which is
quote.
what we're gonna do right now.
So that's what I've done. It's not because I had a conversation with someone else, it's because the Recreation Commission asked me to do that.
Okay.
And the pipe.
We as a board, and you were there, all
Yes.
asked in order to get this, the fact that we asked a couple different times, and as a matter of fact, you asked to have this put on the agenda again, to have this discussion. And again, it's a very finite piece of the whole that we're looking at, which is just fixing the town pond pipe.
Right. I know, Bob couldn't get out there when the snow was 2 feet tall.
So-
And now that the snow's melted, I mean, this was back in February, March, so now we're ready to move forward. So I think you're right. Let's vote as a board to spend $5,000.
Okay. So I make a motion that we move forward and provide DPW with authorization that they can proceed with the $5,000 repair through our Kadesh excavation. Yes? No? Sorry.
Not without, you just make, it's the that notice of intent and through Concom. We
Okay.
can't give the okay without
All right,
that and
sorry.
that paperwork.
Thanks for
So
correcting me.
what you need to vote on is if you're going to reopen Town Pond to be addressed by Recreation, and if you found that, you can- whatever else you'd like to say about the $5,000 quote. I mean, certainly it's within the amount of money that is in the kitty for Town Pond.
So I make a motion for what she, no, I'm just kidding. I make a motion for us to let CPC know and Concom know that we would like to move forward with the repairs for the town pond pipe. And the $5,000 amount seems adequate, and I would have no problem with that. Fair enough? Second?
I have a question.
Okay, discussion?
Who's going to file for
A notice of intent?
notice of intent?
Concom.
I will amend my motion to also request that the notice of intent be filed by Concom as they indicated when we had discussions with them at a previous meeting.
If that's part of the motion, then I second the motion.
Okay. Any other further discussion?
Just a comment.
Sure.
I think Kevin's point is right, that if this does show to have promise, which it may or may not, then I think it is appropriate to have a meeting with Conservation, as they are the overseer of the property, and brainstorm what options may or may not be viable. I think it's a very good point.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
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 No.
Okay. Moving on. Gino, thanks for coming. Sorry to be a little late with you.
Oh, no problem. Happy to be here. I know we had a couple of scheduling issues previously, and it didn't work out, but
Microphone, he needs a microphone.
Move up.
like a mic.
So, welcome
Pretty
Gino
good. How are you?
Carlucci.
Thank you.
Thank you for making the meeting. You're here to talk about the open space plan for us. So,
And, yeah, this is funny because I usually sit over there at this table. But, so far, where we stand is the survey has been done, which I think you've all been given the results. And the good news, the best news in the survey is that compared with the same survey that was done in 1994, I believe. Back then, people were pretty dissatisfied with the recreation facilities in Norfolk, and now they're thrilled with them. In summary, I mean, there's a lot of details, but the improvement in perception was dramatic. That was by far the most dramatic result of the survey. And then I don't know how much. I don't know that you want to go into all the details of it, but you know there were questions about which facilities are used the most and what the greatest needs are and those sort of things. And Todd, I did get your Ian had forwarded your comments on questions. And one thing couple of your comments had to do with titles not being on, and I think when I did the presentation to CPC. Technologically, I had information on the slides that were not showing up electronically, so that might have been the problem with the copy that you had. But anyway, probably the more important aspect is the goals and objectives, which again were basically they were presented as the same as the 1996 plan, and with a couple of minor changes with requests for what should be different. And some of the things that are different is, well, one, before it went out to the boards for a comment, one that I already knew to do was to add support for trails. That seemed to be a popular item, so that was added to the goals and objectives. Conservation Commission requested that an objective be added to restore the conservation fund for maintenance of recreation and conservation lands. Actually, theirs was for conservation, open space lands. And Ian had pointed out that one of the previous objectives was to make sure that every neighborhood had access to recreation facilities close by, and that's no longer an objective of the Recreation Commission, that the objective is to have adequate facilities town-wide, but not necessarily something in every neighborhood. So that's the essence of it. In the meantime, I have been also working on the open space and recreation plan and updating all the statistical data that needs to be presented in that. And I had hoped to have a draft by about now, but I'm a little behind, so it'll be a few more weeks, and then I'll have a draft of basically the complete plan. Then the other element, again, Ian had commented on this, but a required element of the open space and recreation plan is to do what's called ADA assessment and transition plan to look at handicapped accessibility of the recreation and conservation facilities, which will be done shortly.
Okay.
So other than that, I'm here to answer questions that you might have on how it's going, or anything in particular that you would like to address or look into further. Or
I read through the survey. Seemed pretty much on top. The response rate was pretty high, given the usual response rate being, probably had 50% of that. So
I was hoping for 200 responses, because in previous surveys I found that once it hits 200, it hardly budges at all. No matter how many more you get after that, the results hardly budge. And as we were getting close to the deadline, it was edging up. It was like 180, 185. I'm saying, come on, let's make. And then suddenly, in the last couple of days, there was a surge of responses. It was so great. I was worried that somebody had, stuffed the ballot box, kind of a thing. But the other great thing about the survey was that almost all the responses were online. Which makes tabulation much easier, and you could not respond more than once from any computer. So if anyone tried to stuff the ballot box, they would have had to use different computers all over town. So that was not likely to be the case.
Gino, I was, when you gave your presentation to the CPC, I was in the background there. I think there were couple members from the Plainville Recreation Board.
That's right.
That were there, and I do remember, and so, just for the viewing public, if you can explain with Ann, the reason why we're redoing this plan is to hopefully, in the future, it's something grant-related and as far as...
Exactly.
So if you could just explain to the viewing members the purpose of this whole, because it
I
worked, it
will.
was perfect, the plan. I mean, it came out, and the town has done a lot in 20 years.
Yeah, they really have. And there's two major purposes for the plan. One is just to provide, the background information and guidance for moving forward. But the other one, as you point out, is once it's approved by the state, it's good for 7 years, and during those 7 years, the town is eligible for two major kinds of grants. One is for purchase of open space, the other is for construction of recreation facilities. Both of those grants require a match. So towns that have adopted CPA are generally in a better position because they have the funds set aside to provide the match for those grants. So, so this will put Norfolk in a good position for. The grants for recreation facilities are generally limited to about $50,000. So you could do like a $100,000 project with a 50% match, and you could get half paid for by the state. The open space purchase grants vary widely. They can be more. They're generally more because land is more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask about sidewalks, because both on our survey that we had done for master plan a while back and yours, there were sidewalks were addressed, and it was a very high response rate that people would like more sidewalks.
Yes.
And I think, personally, I think sidewalks make wonderful walking trails, especially for the elderly and people with young children, much easier, and if you have them, many more people are apt to get out. So I know not everyone thinks of sidewalks as a walking trail, but really for a lot of people, they're the safest walking trail.
Absolutely, and I'm a big advocate for sidewalks, and I thank you because it was your suggestion to add the question about sidewalks in the survey, and it did get a huge response, and the objectives will definitely be changed to add something about increasing sidewalks.
So will that will be incorporated in the open space and recreation plan?
Yes, and I remember years ago, there was the Road Safety Committee.
It was.
And they had a sidewalk plan. I don't know if that's around somewhere.
I still have that plan.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, it was a 7-year plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
We set up the fund, at town meeting, the stabilization fund was established. There was an override, $50,000 per year for, I believe, I don't remember whether it was 7 or 11 years. It was a defined period of time, and it would have connected all the neighborhoods. It was a great plan. Joe Sebastiano was the one that put it together. It was a really good plan, but it was defeated at the polls. And it would be outdated in many regards because we've added a lot of sidewalks in different areas, like we're doing King Street and Main Street and things of that nature, so it's not as complete, but it's also probably twice as expensive now
Exactly.
as it would have been back it's probably 8 years ago that plan was. I do have it. Share it with everybody who would like to see it.
I have it too, and
Yeah.
they did do a great job.
It was a great plan.
It
It's a
really
shame we
did.
didn't pass it.
Yeah.
Now, Gina, is that, once this is all created, is that something that the state looks at when they decide to award a grant, as far as when we finalize the open space?
Say that again, Kevin?
The open space
The plan?
Yeah, is that something the state looks at before they
Ye-
decide to
Not even,
match?
not even eligible to apply unless you have an approved plan.
Okay, so you have to have the plan, and the plan doesn't matter to the state, you just have to have the plan, and then they still look at other parameters, or?
The plan is very specific. The state has basically a formula you have to follow, specific sections and specific types of information that have to be in it. So if you look at the table of contents of any of the plans, they're like all the same, exact same sections, pretty much. You can deviate slightly, but you have to cover all the bases that they specify.
May I, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
the grants that we've received, Kevin, like the one for the center of town, the roundabouts, things of that nature, Pond Street, the pond by the Pond Street complex, all of those grants really have to be tied to your master plan. And so it is, the detail in the master plan is very, very important. It isn't just that you have a plan. It's what the content is, because they use that as the basis for the primary evaluation as to whether or not you're going to be even eligible for the grant. Then they have, the specs are very specific. And an example is the bricks that we have in the roundabout. People wonder why the bricks are put in when we all know that they deteriorate with moisture. That's because that was what the state mandated we do as part of the grant. And we weren't able to change that. We were even willing to pay for the difference to put in cobblestone day one. The grant is so specific and so detailed that there's very little variance to what you're allowed to do. So what's in the plan is critical.
Okay. Any other questions?
Is there anything else we can do? Do you need anything else from us?
Not at the moment, but if any other questions arise or you need information or something, just let me know, and I'll do whatever I can to answer. Or
What's the next step, Gino?
the next step is to complete the draft, following all those steps that the state specifies. And like I say, I kind of hope to have that by now, but that should be ready in the next few weeks.
Right.
And then probably, because it's summertime now, in September or so, we would have another public forum to present the results of the whole plan, the entire draft.
Well, thanks for all your hard work.
And we did it on the survey and the goals and objectives with CPC, although there was hardly anybody there. Hopefully people saw it on TV. The one in the fall will also have implementation recommendations, so that'll be part of it as well.
I just have a thought. I mean, would there be any way that, like, at fall town meeting that you could speak about? Like, could someone ask you to speak about this, or, you know what I mean? Like,
Can do an update.
So-
Can do an update.
Yeah, if that's...
Yeah.
if
you know, I
that's
mean, just so
requested,
that,
sure, I could do
the,
that.
you know, because, you know, so, you know, there's 200 or so people, but, you know, just so that they, you know, or it might be helpful.
Yeah, and that would kind of be a nice
Sure.
bookend, because the survey started at the fall town meeting last year when the paper copies were distributed, and only 8 people used the paper copies. I was thrilled. Everybody did it online. So
November 18th
yeah, that's right.
is town meeting.
Oh, this year. Yeah, I think it might have been the 16th last year. I don't know, so somewhere in there.
They all meld together.
Yes.
Well, thank you for
Okay.
coming.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
all your
Thank
hard
you very
work.
much.
All the best.
Thank you, Gino.
Good night.
Good night.
Hey, Gino.
All right, next item on the agenda, reserving pavilion and other non-field spaces. I only have what I did from last time, which is a bunch of different towns have parks and recreation departments, contracts, facility use applications, use of town park pavilions, and prices and waivers and addendums are all over the place on all different facilities.
Similar to field use. I found the same thing. It's, and I think a lot of the use of the pavilion at Pond Street, we get probably the most requests to use the pavilion at Pond Street. And I think for a small group, you know, it's a public area and that's fine. But when people are starting to use electricity and have trash pickup, I think that similar to a tiered system that we have for the field use, we may need to consider a tiered facility fee for the pavilion. So I wanted to,
And then other things that need to be thought of is, you know, do you close off the facility? How do you close it off?
yeah, or making a statement saying that, you know, the pavilion may be for rent, but there's a playground attached, so
Sure.
you can't tell people to go away.
Right.
Or unless, you know, I think that would be difficult to do, but unless someone has an idea about how to do that. So,
So any thoughts?
I think it would be difficult to close it off to anybody.
I agree. I think it would be very difficult, especially because it's right adjacent to the playground, and you have the facility is used so much. But I do think that we could reserve the use of the pavilion. We could, for a particular group, if it was large enough, or, maybe decide that, under 25, there's no reservations, or there's no reservations. You can decide that as well.
Sure.
But if that's the case, you could have 100 people showing up, and there's a barbecue, and we do have in the field allocation policy that you can only have, there's no charcoal, because I've been asked for that. I've been asked if they can bring in charcoal grills, and I've actually touched base with the fire department on that, and it's been determined that only gas grills. But again, we need to come up with some guidelines as far as numbers of people, just similar to, I think, what we have for the field use. And if trash barrels need to be brought in, those are extra services, and if they're going to use electricity, we pay for the electricity, and just the time to make sure it's all set and ready to go.
All right. I can obviously work with you in coming up with a application or reservation form or what have you. If you guys have any ideas, please send them along to me. That way I can incorporate them in and we can get them in. Obviously, we'll send this back to you guys for a review and we'll get a final approval. And I'm assuming we'll probably do that at the next meeting. That way, we're good to go for the fall season and going forward. I'm sure it might be requested, but as of right now, we don't really have a policy in place to not allow people, but,
We do, it is used by larger groups. It's also used by smaller groups, and maybe we can, one of the things to think about in the, when to rent it out, or when not, but also when not to. What group, up to what point do you not need a reservation? Is there not a charge?
yeah. Small birthday, 12 people getting together.
Yeah,
Okay. So I'll work on that, and like I said, if you guys have any insights, suggestions, comments, feel free to send them to me. Next item on the agenda, field court updates, and that includes the light requests that we talked about.
So actually, I will talk about Bob Bullock is working on the lights. I talked to him again today. He's still working on the quote. He had some questions about if it's a motion detector light, and so we're talking about a safety light at Pond Street because of the graffiti that we had the last fall. And so we'd like to get a safety light with a motion detector, and I did talk to Bob about that, and I know that he has Ron Bain working on that. I think he's working on a much larger project in town, and he's incorporating the recreation facility in that. And I also told him that if we had a motion detector light over the courts, that would be great. If he wanted to consider a light in the parking lot that was on all the time, so the police could look in and see if anyone is parked there, because in the past that's come up as an issue, then that would be great if he could get a price to do that. But again, he's working on it, and he will get back to us as soon as he has that.
Okay. Any updates on the fields and courts that you want to give?
As far as the courts go, they're set to go,
Okay.
And our playground is opening next week. So the court area is actually going to be closed July 29th, June 29th through, I think it's August 6th. I have to look at my calendar. August 6th, 9 to 1, Monday through Thursday. We close that area because we have the camp running. But other times it's open, and they're in great shape. We will also be using Field B for our summer program, and also the Little League field at Pond Street, as well as the other fields that are on the field allocation. The irrigation system, we're still trying to work that out. I got a price to separate the zones on the Babe Ruth field. 2 zones were wired together, and it causes an issue, a pretty large issue as far as the infield clay mix getting very wet when we are irrigating the outfield to a level to not have it turn brown. And apparently several years back, the two zones were wired together. So to separate those zones and to figure out where the wire is broken It's about $2,500. So I forwarded that to DPW to look into. And then we are also working again with Hunter, which is the manufacturer of our irrigation system, and to address different nozzles, and the pressure gauge on the pump on the well is broken, so we're going to have that fixed, because a lot of what can come out of a particular head with the use of a particular nozzle is all based on water pressure. So we have to figure out that first.
Okay.
So that's it so far.
All right. Next item on the agenda is working with DPW on field maintenance equipment purchases. I brought up at previous meetings, and last year, might have been the fall or what have you, that we purchased, or we had authorized to purchase a couple of backpack blowers.
A small mower.
And a small mower to allow DPW to do the things that they need to do in our town, because it wasn't part of their budget, but it also helps us out long-term because they're able to use those items at our facilities as well. I thought it'd be probably good for us to continue asking those questions, the dialogue, what is it that they need, what is it that they're short on as far as equipment, and that could be utilized in order to make our fields better, so we don't have to spend a lot of money outsourcing. One of the things, obviously, that came up initially was the thatcher, to do some dethatching of the grass, as the previous outsourced company that did the cutting the grass just cut the grass, didn't really collect it, kind of got really compacted, and some of the fields, if they were thatched, they would probably come up a lot better. And obviously, if they have this particular piece of equipment on a going forward basis, they'd be able to use it and help our fields out. Other items of thought were a seed slicer.
Speed seeder.
Speed seeder.
Right, a speed seeder. We have a slice seeder. It's large, but to do goal mows in smaller areas, or even running down the center of a field, a speed seeder is very nice to have. It creates holes, it drops seeds, and it brushes the seed in. Redexum is the manufacturer. Even though they're an attachment, they're not inexpensive at all. They're $7,500 probably. So I think they're looking at different possibilities.
Okay. But, one of the more immediate needs probably be that thatcher piece, which, if I recall correctly, was not that expensive for attaching to the zero-turn mowers. But just, as they have their needs, they're supposed to come to us and let us know what those needs are, and then we can weigh the decision on whether we purchase it for them or not. Then they put it into their inventory to be able to utilize for us. And that's all I have. Any questions or concerns on that item? And then last item, programming updates.
Our summer programs start June 29th. We have 2 programs starting. Very looking forward to them. The summer playground program and Fun in the Sun, and 3-4 Let's Play Some More, which are the preschool programs. We have about 40 children in each of those every week. The playground program has a couple of hundred registered. We usually at this point also continue to take registrations, and that increases, but most of our programs are doing very well as far as registrations go. The Challenger program, which is the new soccer program that's going to be taking place July 13th. Very happy for the first year, it's young children. They have about 24 in that already, so that's great. But we have everything from, our Lego program has been full for a month, and Math Mania is full, and we have all sorts of programs in between, and the registrations are going very well.
What is it about Legos?
Yeah, it's
Kids love it.
Yep, they do.
Love 'em.
We have it's actually an engineering program that we hired Playwell to do, and then we do it during the school year as well, but it's really wonderful. They learn a lot of great things as well as just have fun playing with Legos.
They do love them.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that brings us to a conclusion. We need to pick a next date for our meeting. I would recommend July 20th, if that's good for everybody.
Looks fine.
July 20th? July 20th?
There is another meeting that evening. and I think they have this room reserved. There's a meeting on, with Pondville.
Okay, well, we've had it videotaped in our office, too.
It's not live,
Are
but
you
we
at
can
that
do it in
meeting?
our office, and they tape
Are
it
you at
and then
that
they
meeting,
play it.
though? I was
Oh, you are,
planning on it.
oh, okay.
Okay.
Oh, that's what he was saying, I'm sorry.
July 27th?
That's good.
Tom?
27th?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Should be fine.
Okay.
So
27th?
if we go out to the 27th, at some point, we'll be emailing people just to come in and sign vouchers
27th.
Are you signing
Yeah.
vouchers?
Yes, I
I
can.
didn't know if you wanted to do
before
We can do that, yeah.
Yeah, I just thought I'd let people know. Usually can't go that.
So our next meeting will be
that
July 27th at 7 o'clock. And now it being 8:13, I adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And we're good.